Welcome to Your Inspired Journey. I'm Carla Andrews, and I have the pleasure of being here with Lisa Pinney. She is a phenomenal coach, of course, of different areas. Let me start that part again. She is an encounter coach who helps others in really dealing with their emotions. She's an author. She helps people transform from a certain place into their lives to their desired location. Welcome, Lisa. How are you?
I'm doing good today. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure because I know right before we jumped on the session that we were talking about just helping others with their emotions. But before we get into that space, I really want to learn more about who is Lisa. Let me take this part off right here. Before we jump into that space of learning of how you work with others, share with us who is Lisa Pinney.
I am a wife of 38 years, a mother of 2 adult children, a grandmother of 3,
Wow.
and I like to say I'm kind of partially retired.
Well, when you're doing what you love, you're really not working, right?
Right? So true.
So you're in the space of helping others, in so many different ways. But you have to share with us what inspired you to take this journey of being in the space of coaching, transformation. What took you to this path?
To be honest with you, it wasn't an inspiration. It was driven by my own pain.
Hmm.
I'd say about, yeah. Mm, I'd say about 13 years ago, 14 years ago, I left my job at a small Christian school to work in an inpatient dual diagnosed rehab. I Both my kids moved out, we moved, and this is a mostly female audience, so I went through my personal season. I guess that's a fair way of saying it. And all of those things happened within a year and a half. And I just started to change. I felt numb 5 days a week while I was working. And then on Sundays, when I sat down to drink my coffee in the morning, I just would fall apart and cry. And it stayed
Wow.
that way for a long time. And I couldn't figure out, me, the person who was the strong one, who was always there for everyone else, I couldn't figure out how to help myself because everything I knew to do wasn't working.
Hmm.
And yeah, so the pain lasted for overall about 7 years, but through it, it lessened and it ebbed and flowed, but most of it was constant.
Hmm.
So I just had to figure out some new ways of doing things. And part of that included, I actually went to a therapist. I had 3 or 4 sessions with her, and each one was like really pivotal. And after that, I felt unstuck enough to work through some things on my own. And as I worked through them, I started to heal and I started to feel better. And I started to have my own encounters. So,
So let's back up for 1 second because you mentioned a pain, and I know pain comes in different, factors. Is it emotional, mental, physical,
so honestly,
spiritual?
it's all of everything you said. Spiritually,
Hmm.
all of my devotional practices weren't working. Emotionally, I had persistent anxiety coupled with depression. And then because we are spirit, soul, and body, I also had health problems. And it was everything. It was a little bit of everything. So I don't think it's like mental disease. I just thought of a lot of it. I see a lot of it as emotional because a lot of people struggle with anxiety and depression.
Hmm.
And that's a little bit different than a mental health diagnosis of, let's just say, PTSD or bipolar, just for a
Hmm.
comparison's sake. I think that
Hmm.
anxiety is pretty prevalent in our society today.
Yeah.
And I think everybody
So,
can relate to it.
and then you mentioned about, and just before, this is offline, for some, your earring is beautiful, but it's hitting against the cord of the your mics. Yeah. Let me see if, oh, I can't hear you now for sure.
Really?
Okay,
All
I
right.
can hear you. No,
Okay.
you don't leave your glass. No, leave your earrings. They're beautiful. You can leave them.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, now it's not hitting against it again. So you're fine right now. So yeah, so you mentioned about encounters. What do you mean by encounters?
Um, okay, so I'm a woman of faith, and people all, you can pray, you can read, you can have your spiritual practices, but I think that for me, I needed God to come to me and show up big in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so let's just say reading a devotional. For a lot of years, honestly, the first part of my life, it made a lot of sense. And I felt wonderful when I practiced my faith. And then I went through those like 7 years where nothing. I felt nothing. I felt no joy. If I read, my mind was so, it was racing so much, I couldn't focus. And so I kind of just needed God to break through for me. And the way he did that was with Brene Brown's book, I Thought It Was Me, But It Isn't. And it was a book on shame and imperfection. And that sort of helped bring me out to realize that lots of people are experiencing what I am experiencing. And it broke the pattern of that I had erected for myself of I'm okay. I can handle it. When in fact, really, I wasn't. To be honest with you, looking back, I wasn't. I was just pretending. I was just putting on a great facade.
Wow. And
Yeah.
so to be able to realize that well, I guess, you have to be aware, right? You have to be aware and have that awareness of something is happening before you can change what's happening.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, if I was personalizing things and I was remembering a person I used to be strong, but now I was in need and I wasn't acknowledging it.
Hmm.
And so I had to give myself permission to be human. I had to give
So
myself,
before, so
go ahead.
before you weren't feeling that you were human. What were you feeling? Like
Superhuman.
super, yeah, super, like you can handle everything.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Superhuman, the perfect Christian, all those kinds of things, and that was true at one point, but things change in our lives, circumstances change, and we have things that happen that are outside of our control. And I didn't give myself space to acknowledge it. But once I gave myself permission,
Hmm.
I stopped personalizing it. Like something's wrong with me. And I started saying something is wrong, period. Not with me. It's just
Hmm.
something is wrong.
And that's a great way of putting it, because a lot of times we do take it, we internalize a situation, a temporary situation, and then it stays with us. And then it puts us in a place where we are in a space of stuckness, because
Mm-hmm.
it's almost like living it over and over and over, like on replay,
Mm-hmm.
versus just seeing it as that experience that we went through. But we sometimes may need someone to help us keep going through, right? We have to keep going through the experience. Sometimes we stay stuck in that experience.
Mm-hmm. And so after I read the book, um, Gifts of Imperfection, which I highly recommend, it's one of her first books. And it's actually my favorite of all of Brene Brown's books.
Hmm.
But after I read that book, then I got a little bit inspired and I developed a group called Dispelling Shame. And that was just supposed to be a safe space for women to unpack their personal stories and to find a common ground and know that they were okay. So that lasted a little while. It wasn't as successful as I wanted it to be. So I just let it go, and I worked for a little while. Actually, I worked for a health system, and that also plays into my story, because what I learned in the medical field actually became part of the kind of work that I do, because I'm holistic in nature, and I want people to pay attention to how they're feeling medically, because if you have emotional anxiety and your body is giving you problems, like you were starting to have health problems, the two might be connected. And so that allowed me to explore why I was struggling so much physically, but it also allowed me to heal, because I worked for some pretty good people. I worked for some bad ones, but I worked with some good ones. And those good ones,
it helps you. It helps you to appreciate the good ones, don't it?
yeah, absolutely,
But
absolutely.
and there is that connection, right? That spiritual, mind, body, soul space. Because as you mentioned, a lot of times our emotions do show up as in physical issues that we're having. How we feel. We may start eating too much. We try to numb the pain in so many different ways. And a lot of times, until we make that connection and that awareness, nothing changes. It just gets worse, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. It's so true. And so I just feel like you have to acknowledge everything. And most Americans, we just want to talk. We don't want to pay attention to all the signs that are telling us, hey, you're in trouble. You need to give yourself some grace. You need to take care of yourself, And so when I started to do that, little by little by little, I got better. And the more I got whole physically and spiritually and emotionally, the more I realized I was changing. But I no longer wanted to work within a healthcare system. And in fact, I didn't want to work for anybody. I wanted to do what accidentally and kind of by God's design started to show up in my world. So I started helping people more and more, and that really became a driving force in my life. And the one big thing that I learned was that, there's all kinds of things you can do for self-care, but you have to deal with your past, because oftentimes it's your past, the residual effects that form, this crazy thinking that we have. And if you don't deal with your past, you just keep bringing it with you into your present. So
True.
I just help people connect the dots from their past to their present. And then we incorporate God into the mix. And what I always say, I can't do it, but God can do something for you. I'm just going to lead you to him and let you have an encounter.